morning, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us for, I was going to say May, then April's Housing Hive session. We'll give it a few seconds just to let people sort of filter in from previous meetings, and then we'll get into today's topic, cover the introductions, cover a little bit of background on the topic, purposes of today, and then we'll introduce a guest speaker as well and get into the topic today, which is the CRM movement in housing. Which just before we start is we've been working in the housing space ourselves as a transformational partner for 20 years and kind of seen themes have changed throughout that time. And I think particularly across the past sort of 2 years or so, I think a movement of sort of true CRM platforms has been quite a key one when we're sort of looking into digital transformation roadmaps and capabilities assessments and what to sort of look at next. Obviously, it's quite a big project, quite a big implementation. So on that basis, we thought it'd be appropriate to arrange a webinar, right? Because it's often, the topics of this is often driven by sector needs, sector challenges, and sort of trends and themes as well. So we'll jump into that shortly. But yeah, I think quite a few people have filtered in now. We had a large number of registrations again today. So obviously a topic which you guys are all interested across the space, which is great. But yeah, just a quick note on the agenda. We'll jump into a brief overview of myself, of Prodo as an agency, and then we'll jump into the main sort of topic of the session, introduce our guest speaker. We will have time for some Q&A at the end as well. We've prepared some, and we had a few through our registration form sort of ahead of the session, which we've kind of prepared for. But if anyone does have any questions throughout, do feel free to use the chat pane, and we'll look to address those as and when we move through. But yeah, we do record these and sort of share the recordings later on. So for the time being, if you wouldn't mind keeping the mics on mute for now, that'd be great. But please, as I say, do make use of that chat window. But yeah, to begin with, a very quick overview of us at Prodo. So my name is Jacob. I'm head of sales here at Prodo and been with the organisation for over 6 years. But our sort of remit of the partnership in the space is very much focused around digital transformation. And as I say, we've been working with housing associations for over 20 years, and our offerings essentially sort of evolved as the sector needs have evolved and as digital best practices evolved, and web development's obviously been a sort of a core for us throughout that. We also have a suite of housing specialist self-service products as well. So customer portals, customer apps, these sorts of things. But we're also brought in as a consultant as well to sort of plan that initial digital roadmap and often capabilities assessment from a digital transformation perspective as well. But yeah, we're with hundreds of associations throughout that time, so we're really familiar with your challenges and the themes sort of moving through the sector as well. But yeah, I suppose a quick sort of background on today's topic then to begin with. Really, it is, as I say, sort of at the beginning, it has been a significant change we've noticed when we've been running these workshops with transformation teams and with the C-suite sort of exec functions of housing associations, talking about what's next, talking about strategic direction and digital transformation as a whole. And I think moving towards true CRMs has been quite a strong change that we've seen the past sort of 2 years or so. It's it's almost like a common sort of theme, isn't it? That the housing sector is often a little sort of step behind in terms of transformation, sort of digital. We've seen that with sort of web products. We've seen it with sort of the self-service and channel shift movement, which is obviously sort of still something which is moving on today. And I think the most recent one is CRMs. Housing is sort of catching up to other industries, I suppose, and looking to the likes of Salesforce, looking to the likes of Dynamics and HubSpot that we'll talk about a little bit more today. But yeah, from a Dynamics perspective, particularly, we've heard some mixed, I suppose, outcomes in terms of success on those. So Salesforce is a sort of a growing part of it, and on HubSpot particularly as well. But today, what we're going to do is cover the landscape around this, why housing associations are looking to CRM, how you should go about it, what to think about in terms of planning, and then ultimately sort of ensure successful implementation, unlike some of the other projects that we've sort of all heard about in the space. But I suppose just to begin with, and you will have seen this slide from us, and unless you're completely new here, it's something we use quite often in terms of just touching upon that wider housing landscape and complexity. As I say, our offering as a whole from Prodo's perspective is always based upon challenges in the space, and we use this sort of check-in, if you like, as sort of a basis for that, from cost of living sort of impacting the ability to pay rent for many people out there, and you guys having to sort of resource money support teams. Obviously, consumer regs this month being a big sort of change across the board as well. Particularly, we look into the transparency, influence and accountability standard as well. Obviously, sort of self-service and data and CRM forms part of that quite heavily. And of course, sort of rightly so, a drive on that stock condition side of things as well, particularly when you think about Awab's law. But I suppose all of this kind of leads to, we totally appreciate the housing associations at the moment having to do more with less, and therefore lots of you are looking to digital transformation and technology to improve efficiency of operation, to improve effectiveness of customer support, and sort of everything that surrounds that, I suppose. But yeah, when we do look into these sort of workshops with housing associations, there's often very consistent challenges that we sort of hear around this, and some of these help frame the topic of today, really around sort of CRM and the benefits of it. We all know legacy systems has been a sort of a common theme throughout, and I think we're probably all familiar with the ones we're sort of referring to there, which we'll come on to later. Often those legacy systems come with a lack of governance around data, and functionality can be a little bit clunky, and therefore that kind of leads to people internally just finding workarounds to use them in different ways, which does sort of feed into point two, which is those data issues. Often that data is in disparate systems, and there's sort of low confidence in its accuracy, and therefore makes the segmentation of that data quite difficult. I suppose, how can you segment data and sort of target communications and service delivery when you're not sure on sort of the accuracy and sort of value of that data itself? We're just kind of making the point in those sort of three steps around legacy systems leading to, I suppose, internal workarounds, therefore becoming a little bit more inefficient working through that, leading to those data governance issues, which does make segmentation of data, and therefore that sort of transparency standard we touched upon, utilising that data in things like self-service platforms is more difficult sort of in and of itself, I suppose. So they're the consistent sort of challenges we tend to hear, and kind of frames today's session really, which obviously is all around CRM. So I thought now would be a good time, Paul, to introduce yourself as MD of our sister brand, Fuelius.
Sure. Thanks, Jake. Good intro. So I'm Paul. I'm the managing director of Fuelius. Now, Fuelius is a sister company of Prodo. I've a number of people I can see in the chat right now. I've met over the years. I've been part of sort of the Prodo Fuelius group for about 11 years now. And we made the sort of strategic decision probably around 2.5, 3 years ago to split the Prodo brand into two, one being Prodo, one being Fuelius. And the reason we did that was because as a previous sort of one brand of Prodo, we served two very different audiences. We served the social housing space really well, and then we also served the commercial space sort of outside of housing as well. And it became quite difficult to segment our messaging and sort of segment our positioning as one brand. So we created we sort of hived off Fuelius as a sub brand. But Fuelius has been a HubSpot Elite partner since 2015. We've been working in the CRM space for 10 years next year. And we tend to do very, very similar things to what Prodo do outside of the space, with the sort of added flavor of CRM. So what I'm here to talk about today is CRM in the housing space, and give you insight as to sort of how we've solved that with HubSpot and what we do in this space. And in addition to sort of some of the brands that I guess are somewhat linked to you guys in terms of home builders, we've done a lot of work with the likes of Bloor, Cameron Homes, Moda, Lovell, a load of sort of home builders really, when we're working with them across their CRM strategy. And what we've seen over the sort of 2 years now is more of a commercial approach to CRM being considered by housing associations. And then just some of the brands we obviously work with as well outside of your space, like Emirates, Old Trafford, Skyscanner, M&S Bank Arena, Manchester Airport Group, a load of sort of other clients I could name here as well. But I'd like to sort of pick some impressive logos for these presentations.
Excellent, thanks, Paul. So I thought it'd be good for us to touch upon, Paul, just as we begin, sort of before we get into the CRM movement side of things, just sort of recapping, I suppose, a previous movement, I suppose, of the housing management system side of things, and why you feel that's particularly different to what an actual sort of true CRM product is, based on your sort of experience of integrating with HMSs in the past.
Yeah, I think, if I go back sort of over this 10, 11 year journey, I hundreds of housing associations we've worked with in the group, and I think one of the constants has always been, our website needs to integrate with our housing management system, our customer portal needs to integrate with our housing management system. And I think we've pretty much integrated with every housing management system that exists, I think. But they're always, Capitas and Civicas and sort of big, sort of outsourced software companies that have sort of coined the phrase housing management system. And I think when we've done those integrations, what I think we've noticed over the years is that housing, it's a housing management system, not a customer management system. And what we've sort of seen is housing, the property, the stock, the physical building is the sort of primary object in these systems, and the customer's almost seen as a secondary or as an afterthought. And to an extent, the housing management systems are designed to make sure we get paid for people living in our properties and make sure that our properties are maintained to a good standard. And they've not really been focused on, let's make sure our customers, our tenants, our residents are happy. Let's make sure they're safe. Let's make sure they're, looked after by us as a housing association. And I think they've been sort of very, static in their development. They've been very, they've really held a big sort of hold on the market because it's been considered a huge step that no one ever wants to consider changing housing management system because it is a, colossal thing to do. But as such, what we've seen is sort of people having to either try and come up with sort of hacky ways to make digital services integrate with housing management systems and interact with housing management systems, or almost omit, sort of omit digital services. And I've spoken to a lot of housing associations recently that are doing, shared ownership on spreadsheets, for example.
Yeah.
And every single time they release a new development and they get hundreds, if not thousands of people applying for individual properties, they need to, unfortunately, once they've decided on who is successful in applying for said property, they need to let down 799 people. And they're typing out 799 emails, or they're, copying and pasting 799 emails, and they're not using systems that could literally turn that into a 1 to 2 minute task because the housing management system doesn't let them. So I think if we go back, in my 10-year sort of tenure here, 5, 6, 7 of my first years, it was very much a housing management system play. But I think in recent years, we've seen a bit of an evolution there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. It goes across all sort of teams as well, doesn't it? That shared ownership example is a really good one. I've been sat in workshops whereby even just the comms team who look after sort of communications to customers have had to export data from the sort of centralized HMS, get the BI team maybe to manipulate that in certain ways, re-upload it to something like a MailChimp or another sort of third-party external email tool, always with that sort of worry that, is this a marketing email or is it service email? Therefore, have they opted into this? We're not sure. We'll just kind of we'll go with it and sort of hope for the best. But yeah, they can be difficult to integrate with, and they're one of those systems, aren't they, that because they're so large and the organisations rely upon them so heavily, they become very, very sort of ingrained in the operation. Therefore, quite hard to change. And I suppose that could be one of the delays behind housing moving into CRM, sort of true CRMs around now, I suppose, rather than CRM.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, and obviously you'll be better at defining this than me, but we asked ChatGPT just to sort of define CRM, because it is, we have heard housing associations try to use the HMS as a CRM in the past, and we kind of alluded to a few examples of as you put it, sort of hacky ways to do that, maybe using something like a MailChimp or some sort of other plugin. But in essence, it's kind of on the screen here that it's a CRM, it's customer relationship management, which is all around managing and nurturing relationships with customers. And I think that feeds in really nicely to sort of hearing the voice of the customer, the sort of regulatory changes that housing associations have to sort of adhere to at the moment, certainly around transparency and accountability, and giving tenants what they need, the tools they need to sort of influence service change and sort of have a voice on how things progress. And yeah, there's obviously sort of three big player sort of logos on the screen there as well. So it is a different platform, isn't it? I think from HMS to CRM for sure. But yeah, the shift in focus, I suppose, from the sort of more traditional from more traditional HMS through to the customer side of things.
Yeah, I think, we Fuelius have implemented CRM now for sort of between 500 and 600 companies over the years. And I think when we do that, we do it as, we do it with HubSpot all the time. We're a HubSpot Elite partner, which is sort of the highest level we can be in the HubSpot space. Very small amount of partners reach that status. But But what we see, A, with HubSpot as their vision and their message, and B, with our own vision and message, but also the way we do implementation, is that CRM is designed to focus on the customer. The customer is the primary object, so to say. The goal of CRM is to focus on the customer. The property is almost ancillary to it. The different objects, the plot, the location, the land that the property's on, all of that, cool.
Yeah.
But it's not really, the primary goal of CRM. So I think, as we've seen there are some well-documented use cases in the space, and there's across everything, across Salesforce, Dynamics, ourselves with HubSpot builds, where people have turned around and sort of decided to, almost throw the proverbial baby out the bathwater and get rid of the housing management system, and ultimately decide that customer first solution is the way forward. And with that then comes, okay, how do we put a system in place which increases customer happiness? How do we put a system in place that improves engagement? How do we get better at issue resolution? How do we put an SLA in place that ensures we respond to every single issue in the appropriate amount of time? Which I guess, to your point, Jake, I guess really supports with that transparency and trust building that you're able to do, and the reporting suite off the back of that you're able to gain, and the metrics you're able to learn about your customers becomes pivotal.
Yeah, it's definitely that customer focus, isn't it? Like you were saying, sort of leading into that, and the sort of the surveying and sentiment element. But on that slide before about sort of sector landscape capacity, there's sort of massive sort of issue, isn't it? And housing associations are having to look for ways to unlock that internal capacity. And I think the automation, which I'll come on to shortly, I think obviously the customer side of things and increased customer satisfaction, I suppose, in a way was one part of it, but the internal sort of capacity as well, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I guess, again, if I split, if I look over a 10-year period, I think probably, if I look at period one as first 5 years, period two as second 5 years, I feel like the first 5 years there was a channel shift was the play in the housing space. It was everything that was spoken about, really. If you were talking about digital, you were talking about channel shift, and you were talking about Dr. Gerald Power and PwC and stats that say £12 down to, £18 down to £12 down to 3 pence or whatever it may be. But I think that, when we work with commercial organizations, sort of private companies that are for profit, it becomes how can we reduce manual work that ultimately, in some cases, reduces workforce requirements and saves money. Now, obviously, in a social housing world, it's different. We look at, how can we remove manual task, manual intervention, cumbersome tasks to free up individuals within businesses to have more time to work on things that drive bigger impact in the sector or bigger impact to customers. Going back to the shared ownership example, and we'll touch upon this shortly, there's a housing association we're working with at the moment that simply by implementing CRM, and this isn't to replace their housing management system, this is supplementary to their housing management system. Simply by implementing CRM in a shared ownership environment, they're going to save something like 340 people hours per week just in managing the application process through to completion. And I think this is the first time people are looking at our housing management system has never allowed us to do, issue A, issue B, issue C. What else can, and how can we interface that with the HMS? So it really is a shift in focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Okay. And then we touched upon this, didn't we, in terms of the sort of I suppose, in that shift in focus around this hub and spoke model from where it was to sort of where it's going.
Yeah, and I think there's been a few things we've seen in our space generally in digital, not necessarily related to CRM, but just in terms of sort of how salespeople do outreach these days, or telephony and whatnot, where COVID almost caused a huge immediate sort of change of tact in terms of people's tactics and how they did certain things. And we went from, everybody had Yealink desk phones that they would pick up and they'd use, and it was every company had telephony, and COVID came and everyone got sent home, and now nobody really has desk phones, and it's all, as an example. And I think it's caused a number of shifts in the digital space. And I think this is one of them, really, where what we mean by the hub and spoke model is housing management system was the absolute be all and end all. Everything started with that housing management system, and integrations weren't that easy. It was almost a walled garden, and other systems had to be adjusted, or bluntly, things like requests for pets or mutual exchanges and sort of processes like that were almost ignored digitally, and it turned into, we can't solve it with the HMS. There's a paper-based process, there's an email-based process, there's a telephone line and whatnot. And now if we look at sort of on the next slide, if we look at the sort of the way we're seeing CRM work now, is CRM is becoming that centralized system in the middle. All of the modern CRMs that exist, particularly HubSpot, have incredible APIs that now mean there's literally nothing you can't integrate to these to these CRMs. So now we're in a situation where the CRM is in the middle, the customer is in the middle, and we start looking at, okay, what systems can we interface with that exist inside our business currently, or don't exist inside our business, but we can go and procure to mean everything talks to each other. So instead of a housing management system telling us that a tenant's made their rent payment this month, a different system saying they've made an application to move into a shared ownership property to sort of get themselves on the property ladder, a different system telling us they've actually got 3 current repairs outstanding on the property they currently live in. Yes, we can do it all through different systems, and we can pick the right system for the customer, but we can flow all of that information through to CRM so that we have one single source of truth when it comes to customer.
Yeah, that's where the power of that segmentation comes in as well, isn't it? Because it is those insights that these associations have to sort of demonstrate being able to understand and acting upon, in terms of knowing the customer, hearing customer voice, and sort of acting upon it, I suppose.
And as an example, just to give a sort of non-sector specific example, we have a CRM in place for a software company, and we've worked with them for about 3 years now, and we've worked with them to basically create this model where we have that single source of truth. Because their support desk runs through it, their contact center runs through it, their own sort of internal systems run through the CRM. We've been able to create reports that basically show them that if a customer has support tickets that have breached the SLA within a certain period, they're X% less likely to renew their contract at the end of that term. So now what we're able to do is put automation and workflows in place, and reports and dashboards and triggers and escalations all automatically to prevent that happening.
Yeah.
That not happening therefore increases renewals, and therefore there's less chasing, there's less admin, there's, and whatnot. But there's so much we can do whereby having that single source of truth allows us to make decisions across other systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And yeah, just a very sort of brief stat, I suppose. We've kind of touched upon the movement of CRMs being quite housing focused the last couple of years, but there are statistics out there to say this sort of the growth across the UK as a whole is only going to continue as well. So it has sort of increased twofold since 2016 to this year. Projections, according to statistics, show it's going to further double again within the sort of the next 4 years. And I think part of that will be elements such as the public sector sort of catching up with these sorts of implementations, and it being more accessible. We'll touch upon HubSpot later, but there's various sort of tiered levels to it, which means that you don't have to be an enterprise level organization to make use of a CRM. It can be sort of applicable to all. So yeah, that sort of growth and movement, and I suppose it feeds into the perceived value of it, really. Lots and lots of organizations and lots of industries, including the housing space now, are looking to CRM to sort of help with the internal operational efficiencies, but dealing with customer support ultimately expect to be.
And we can validate that as well. I think we've seen in the UK, we've personally seen our own market in sort of HubSpot CRM space. We've seen that grow, I think 34% year on year in terms of as a platform for us as a business, and for the available market that's out there. And from doing our own research and working with third-party researchers, it's a product and a space that is just exploding, which is, on one hand, it's almost like, yeah, of course, but on the other hand, it's CRM's not new. CRM's been here for years and years, but it's almost been dominated in the CRM world by a sort of a big player in Salesforce. And I think one of the things that scares people when they look at Dynamics or they look at Salesforce is that you're probably you're probably talking £1 million to get out of bed really with Salesforce. Not to buy a license, but by the time you factor in, we want to go down the route of Salesforce. They've got 33 different products you can bolt in that, are sort of, have almost been cobbled together from acquisitions they've done. Then you've got the costs that come with sort of Salesforce developers and Salesforce consultancies. And it's become a very, in that situation, you're then looking at, we're going to spend more than we currently spend on our current housing management system. Is it worth it? Dynamics has always been a bit of a, when you buy Dynamics, what you basically get is an empty toolbox that you've got to go and work out how to use. And so many Dynamics projects without appropriate planning and without an appropriate partner tend to fail. And that's where we've seen our comfort in HubSpot, where, the ability to say, let's take HubSpot and let's use it for shared ownership only, or let's use it for this particular requirement, or let's use it for marketing new build homes, for example. You can start at a much smaller level and you can then grow it throughout the business. And I think that's why we're seeing this growth, is because you don't need to be that enterprise anymore that you mentioned.
Yeah. We've even seen that specifically in housing, haven't we, in the past, whereby sort of we've been talking about HubSpot with housing associations for a long, long time. And I think the first sort of instance of it was quite simple customer service elements around things like ticket pipelines and around chatbots and the live chat function, all feeding into that central database, which is integrated with a HMS, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely.
So on the concept of housing, then obviously we've kind of touched upon housing landscape, CRM landscape, and some examples so far. But I suppose in the specifics of it and what we've heard and seen, the drivers of it in the particular space that kind of we operate in. And Paul, you kind of alluded to a couple of examples here already around sort of shared ownership and applications. I think that one in particular for us is the applications and onboarding side of things. When we look to digitalize it for our clients from a customer-facing application perspective, it's always been one which is very, very bespoke to the organization and has lots and lots of touch points and often elements of it from an applications point of view, as you said before, is almost kind of offline in a way, which does make the digital transformation side of things quite difficult. And you've kind of touched upon the shared ownership, sales and marketing side of things as well. And if you go into a little bit around, you kind of touched upon the different elements of HubSpot from a shared ownership, sales and marketing perspective. Which parts of HubSpot sort of most appropriate for that bit?
Yeah, I mean, HubSpot consists of 5 hubs effectively. One is Content Hub, which is sort of the you can go as far as building your website in it and building content in it and building landing pages in it and application forms and whatnot, through to Sales Hub, which is your conventional your CRM. So we're selling something to somebody. Here's where it's up to, in terms of maybe a property. You then have Service Hub, which is your customer support desk, your ticketing, your contact center if needs be. You have, forgot my place now. You've got Operations Hub, which is your sort of data manipulation, data warehousing, sort of ability to take data from different sources and cleanse it and whatnot. What did we say? We said content. We said content.
Marketing left, I think.
And the Marketing Hub as well, which is our marketing automation sort of functionality, really, where you have the ability to sort of put the right content in front of the right people at the right time. Now, if we look at that in a shared ownership world, a couple of customers we're working with on this, we have application forms that are specific to the shared ownership requirements, but then are customized for sort of individual needs of the housing association. Application forms that are then, all of that information is saved, stored against the customer profile inside CRM, so that if that customer is unsuccessful and wants to come back and apply for more properties, we don't have to ask them the same information over and over again. And we can ultimately build up what we know about that particular contact. Then we use Sales Hub to sort of track the progress of each individual property. And, with integrations into tools like Pamwin and other such tools, where we have internal tools saying, here's our plot, here's our properties, here's the floor plans, here's all of this, pulling into CRM. And then, as I mentioned before, if somebody decides that, if somebody applies for a property and they're successful, simply moving their card to sort of accepted tells the other 700 applicants that unfortunately they weren't successful. But then we can take it that step further. We can take it into constant communication with that customer throughout that purchase journey. So I always think of sort of the Domino's pizza tracker, and I had the Domino's last night actually, and I think about, you know, it's been ordered, it's in the oven, I think they QA it afterwards and it's out for delivery and whatnot. That's sort of the experience we can give to people when we sell them a home. We can tell them when ground's been broken. We can tell them when, you know, it's up to this stage, it's up to that stage. We can give them that interactive experience. But the feedback from housing associations prior to moving into CRM with HubSpot has been that, you know, to do that, it's been somebody typing away and building out or, you know, manually sending an email to someone and remembering to and whatnot. So we can use the whole HubSpot suite for all of these requirements. But I think the thing that I would double down on is that you don't need to go all in on day one. You know, you can start with shared ownership, and you can start with one particular function of CRM to enhance the sort of the CRM experience, or to enhance the shared ownership experience. And then over time, you can realize the value, gain the ROI, bring more processes into it and bring more tooling into it, and sort of grow the CRM platform as and when needed.
Yeah. I think there's 2 points in that I've seen you guys do really well. And that process of the marketing of the property through to the sales journey of someone sort of inquiring, applying, becoming accepted. So from the marketing hub into sales hub, and then at that point of, okay, yes, this is sort of contract handover now.
Yeah.
Then sort of bringing in the service element, which is, this is a handover process now. We need to sort of look into the snagging process.
Yeah.
Into a customer sort of management perspective.
Yeah, and that's the, you know, we with customers that do the whole journey, you know, we have gone from marketing a new build property all the way through to now receiving, you know, tickets that are ultimately saying there's an unfortunate scratch in my skirting board or whatever it may be, through to communication with the site manager to come and put that right and whatnot. And there's a housing association we've been working with who one of their marketing processes is to sort of identify a home of the week. And what they do with that home of the week, they say this particular home is the home of the week, and here's why it's the home of the week. And they send an email out to people within a certain radius of sort of the location who may be interested in sort of, you know, applying for said property. That process took 20 or 30 hours a week, every week. So it was a full-time hire. 50% of their time every week was on this. We moved them through to a new process, and it now takes 30 or 40 minutes, and it's completely automated all the time. So I think CRM is, you know, needs to be considered as two things. It needs to be considered as one, and the primary reason is that customer relationship and that customer being in the heart of the system. But then it's the internal efficiency gains that come off the back of it, and they're huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the taking it back to the tenancy management bit briefly as well. One of the things, so for us as a transformation partner who supply often customer portals, customer apps, they're often measured in terms of success for us and our clients by levels of engagement, by active usage. And when it comes to that sort of promotion and marketing of these platforms and why they can benefit people, why tenants should be using them, looking into them, what we often find is that promotion is difficult, and the segmentation of data internally is so difficult to be able to sort of pinpoint who may be more interested in a repair side of things, or who may be more interested in actually you can just check balance and pay rent here, or whatever it might be. And I think that kind of shows how something like a CRM with its sort of inbuilt data segmentation for like the likes of targeted comms can complement the rest of a digital strategy, which is, okay, we've got this new customer portal, new customer app. Let's segment data into maybe a particular area or a particular tenure type, and then the likely success of the back of that campaign is higher.
Yeah, definitely. And there's no end to sort of how many, you know, with an appropriately architected CRM, there's no end to how many filters you can apply and sort of how segmented you can be. So, you know, you could go as far as pull me a list of customers that live within an X mile radius of this particular place that are this type of tenancy, that have logged less than 4 repairs this year, that have in the last 3 months fallen behind on rent payments. And you can keep going and layering it and layering it and layering it. And then you can be super hyper targeted with your comms, or super hyper targeted with campaigns that may be designed to increase the usage of other digital services, such as portals or apps or whatever it may be.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, cool. So as we've got you with us as a CRM sort of implementation expert, there may or may not have been some questions in the chat, which we'll ask Liv about shortly, but we did get a few earlier, and there's a few from us to you as well, I suppose. So we have touched upon that. There's been stories, hasn't there, of Dynamics projects failing inside and outside of the sector. We touched upon Salesforce being huge and sort of having to plan for that over quite a long period of time. What would you say to a housing association if they're looking at planning or scoping a CRM implementation project? What do they need to look for?
I think the first thing I would say to your point is that the reason those projects have failed isn't the platform. And to shoot myself in the foot a little bit, and I'll come back to fix it, is that HubSpot projects fail.
Yeah.
And the projects fail because the scoping hasn't been done appropriately on day one. And by appropriately, what I mean is it can be very easy to get quite carried away when it comes to what your phase one should be or what your MVP should be. Yeah. For those that sort of aren't familiar with that term, MVP means a minimum viable product. And what we mean by that is what is the minimum sort of functionality you can deploy as phase one to gain value before getting too carried away and turning it into a massive sort of build. So for me, what I'd be considering is we often hold workshops with organizations where we might go around a service team, a sales team, an IT team, a marketing team, a comms team, and sort of understand what are the most sort of cumbersome or sort of labor intensive service sort of requests or processes that currently exist. We always like to talk to customers as well. So holding focus groups to understand, where could we communicate with you better? Where could our sort of digital services get stronger? And working with a partner to sort of identify and build an appropriate scope for your first release, for your MVP, I think is crucial. And it's also picking the appropriate platform. And what I mean by that, there will be some organizations who HubSpot is not the right fit for.
Yeah.
And there's many organizations that Salesforce isn't the right fit for. I think you need to go into it in a tech agnostic sort of mindset, and you need to decide what the tenant needs, what the organization needs, and then find the platform, as opposed to sort of, Housing Weekly magazine saying there was a really good implementation of Salesforce, for example, or even HubSpot, and deciding we must implement said platform.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be scope first and platform second.
And prioritize off the back of that stakeholder and customer involvement.
Yeah, and start small. Less is more. Get value on day one. Start with shared ownership, or start with mutual exchange, or start with, removing efficiencies in the marketing process, as opposed to all of that plus 15 more things all at the same time, because it will fail.
And it'll take you a year.
Yeah. So it will take you 2 years to fail. Yeah. 2 years to start again. 2 years to go with someone else. So
the next one's very much linked to that. So if you go a bit further on why it might fail, that'd be.
I think I'd double down on that. Really, I've seen projects not get off the ground because, we engage with 2 or 3 core people, project managers, whatever it may be, to sort of have the information relayed back to us as to what may be an appropriate scope for phase one. Everyone gets really excited. We jump on a second call. Suddenly, person A, B, C, and D join the call. Now there's 8, and they've all got their list of requirements. And suddenly, person B's line manager wants to get on a third call, but soon there's 35 people on a call saying what CRM needs to do. And you've got a list as long as your arm, which is a 2-year plan, and everybody's sort of fighting over what part becomes more important. The head of shared ownership wants, shared ownership's the most important. The head of comms, but or customer contact things, that's the most important. So I think you need to take that real holistic customer first view and prioritize it based on the customer. Because I think the single biggest reason is inaccurate or improper scoping prior to the project being started.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. And then kind of touched upon HubSpot a little bit so far, but if it's a fit for the public sector, and I suppose a little bit more about it, I guess.
Excuse me. Yes, definitely. We've got, many customers in it across public and private. There's a not so much belief in the space, but housing is very Microsoft. IT teams feel safe with Microsoft in the housing space. And that's, I think, where we saw a bit of an emergence with Dynamics in the sort of early days, really. Salesforce has gained some sort of popularity in the space, and it's a great tool, great system, but it's a big old system, and it's going back to the sort of scoping, realistically, to see a Salesforce project through of this size. And this isn't a sort of negative about Salesforce. It's purely based on the size of the product and what you can do with it. It's a 3-4 year project, and it never stops. And CRM shouldn't stop. CRM should always keep going and evolving. But linking it back to public sector, HubSpot did a lot of work in the public sector for government, for the housing associations, for we have a local transport sort of company that are government owned that have been considering it from a service perspective and whatnot. So definitely.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. That kind of covers that one as well, I suppose, really, unless you wanted to build upon that.
Sorry, I think for me it's a viable option because we've done it. We've got the experience and sort of worn the t-shirt. But I think why it's a more viable option than other platforms is the ability to sort of launch a low-cost MVP and build and build and build and build. To the tens of people on the call today, I would, if somebody put their hand up and said, "Great, let's replace our housing management system with HubSpot," I think I'd probably say, "Slow down, calm down. Let's take it back a few steps." Where I would start with HubSpot, and this is where it's a more viable option from I would say a cost to value perspective. I would start with a single process or group of processes or departments or something that is taking up a lot of manual time. It's a poor tenant experience. You don't really have the data that you should have off that particular process or that experience, and fix that with HubSpot. Integrate with the housing management system. Fix that with HubSpot. Give it 6 months, and then say, "Great, there's more processes." And I think the reason I say that's a more viable option with HubSpot is that the price to get started and the work required to get started and the API availability mean that you can start small as opposed to, a business case for £1 million.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Any questions come through at all, Liv? Any new ones? I know we've kind of addressed a handful there that we already had, but...
No, not a question, but more of a statement from Rich Harvey. And he said, doesn't help with the HMS systems still using classic databases like Progress instead of SQL or more modern databases.
Yeah, we come across this a lot outside the sector as well. And there are some weird and wonderful ways. And obviously, Rich, you've done some great things and interrogated your databases and whatnot, and we know that well. And we've done things like having to do nightly cron jobs where we are taking a dump of the data at 1 o'clock in the morning from the housing management system, having to run that through a piece of middleware we've built which transposes the data and moves it into a sort of into a SQL database in Azure that then interfaces with HubSpot and whatnot. But the possibilities are still there. It just requires a lot of messing about and a lot of sort of work that shouldn't be required, but is required. But that work, I guess, is on us and not on you. It's for us as an implementation partner to build that function, build that process so that it does feel seamless. But I couldn't agree more with that sentiment.
Yeah. It's been a big part of our experience over the years.
Yeah.
Any others at all, Liv, now?
No.
No? Okay, great stuff. All right. Any final comments, Paul?
No, other than obviously would love to speak to any of you that are, that are considering CRM or have any of those sort of process issues. And I don't mean speak to you as Prodo and Fuelius are sister companies. We share the very same sort of values, really. This isn't I want to speak to you and sell to you. This is if we can carry on these conversations and you want to speak more about CRM or you want to speak more about any of these challenges and we can point you in the right direction or give you some advice, then yeah, definitely.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, great. And if it was a case of someone was interested in sort of seeing a little bit more about it, we can send some stuff in the follow-up, maybe arrange demos and those sort of things.
Absolutely, yeah. And we're gonna join you at Housing 24 as well, in Manchester in June.
End of June, yeah.
End of June. So if any of you are there or colleagues are there, we'll have sort of we'll have solution architects on our stand to walk you through live demos and show you the system in a bit more detail. But yes, definitely.
Brilliant. Okay, great stuff. All right. Well, just before we finish, just a very, very quick note on the next session, which is called cost-effective digital strategies. And one of the first points that we cover in there is incremental change, which feels like it's perfectly planned with what you just said about HubSpot, but it was actually by accident. So yeah, that kind of feeds on really nicely in terms of the next session, which will be 30th of May, same time, final Thursday of the month at 11 o'clock. So we'll be covering different elements of digital strategy in terms of the cost effectiveness, because going back to that sort of previous slide before, we totally get you having to do more with less and sort of show that ROI sooner in terms of investments across the board. So our sort of take on that and our recommendations around cost-effective strategies around that as well. So hopefully we'll see some of you there. We will send a short follow-up after the session, and obviously this is recorded and will be sort of published in the next couple of days too. But yeah, as Paul says, any sort of questions from anyone around CRM, if you want to continue the conversation, be great to do so let us know. But yeah, just wanted to say thank you for everyone's time. Thanks for your time as well, Paul, for joining us. And yeah, we'll catch you for the next one, hopefully. Thanks, guys.